Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I want to send each and every one of you loads and loads and loads of love, and I hope you're doing exceedingly well. And don't forget to get that lovely hot cup of coffee or tea or whatever it is, because I've got a fabulous story for you this evening that you're really just going to love. But before we do, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Robin and I'm from the small village in Hampshire in England, where I grew up in a quaint, rather quirky-looking 300-year-old farmhouse on a couple of acres of land with my mother and father and my brother Harry in the 80s era. Our whimsical, charming home was made of beautiful old stone walls, while the back facade was made out of bricks and mortar and was painted in white. There were large wooden white sash windows throughout the house, and a very large dazzling wooden front door that was painted bright pink. On the walls of our home we had beautiful climbing pink roses and purple wisteria that gave a rarely English quaint countrified ambience to our home. Our garden was dotted with apple trees and plum trees, as well as a scattering of oaks, and overlooked beautiful pasture land and emerald green hills where horses would invariably gallop and graze. On the front perimeter of our home was a huge village green, and all the village homes were nestled quite close together. We lived in a very friendly village community where everybody knew each other, and over the years we would have village fetes and other exciting village events. It was common to observe horses and riders trotting down our street, and it was very idyllic life with the town of Andover only about 15 to 20 minutes away. Growing up, I was no stranger to the paranormal, because all my life strange things would happen in my home that made me fully aware that we were not alone. Sometimes I would get this horrifying, airy feeling that I was being watched and studied, and it was so scary I would insist on sleeping in my parents' bedroom because I was so rattled by these ominous, nefarious experiences. My parents would reassure me that there was absolutely nothing in my room, and put down my fearful, frantic outbursts as down to a fertile, overactive, childlike imagination, and were extremely dismissive of my claims that I was indeed being watched by a ghostly spectre. "Nonsense, darling," my mother would say. "There's nothing there." She would look under my bed to absolutely reassure me, and open and close my closet to make her point that there was indeed nothing there. When I was your age, I used to imagine all kinds of monsters were lying in wait for me under the bed, but it was never ever true. I would tell my parents there were green goblins and dragons hiding under my bed that wanted to gobble me up, she would tease. Despite the insistent ramblings from my parents, I knew very differently, and I was absolutely certain we were being watched, studied and observed by invisible eyes. Even my stoic brother Harry, who was a very quiet, reserved, reticent boy, told me that he also unequivocally believed my story, because he also sensed that something outer-worldly was watching him at night, but he begged me not to tell our parents. "I know it's a woman," he would say, "a lady from another time." Sometimes in the night my closet door would just open all on its own accord, and I could sense a presence just staring at me. I would be so terrified I would hide under my covers, hardly daring to breathe. I would then hear a woman's shoes walking around my bedroom and stopping at the end of my bed, and I could feel her steely eyes observing my sleeping form. I would never ever look, because I was certain I would see a ghost staring at me. I would close my eyes ever so tightly, begging God with all my heart to make it go away. And sometimes I would be so terrified I would literally race to the light switch with my eyes tightly closed, because I was petrified of seeing that ghost for myself, and I would quickly switch the light on. When the light was on, I felt safe again, and so invariably I experienced many restless nights, sleeping under the full bright glare of an electric light. One day my parents decided they wanted to extend the kitchen, and finally we received planning permission to advance our exciting plans. as you have to go through this arduous, stringent protocol when you're dealing with a Grade 2 listed building, which ours was. The moment the builders began to extend the kitchen, strange things began to happen in our home. It was almost as if we'd stirred up something paranormal. Lights would go on and off on their own accord, and things would get misplaced, only to be found days later in an entirely different spot. Whatever this ghostly spectre was, it clearly did not like my father at all, because he would wake up with strange bruises and scratches all over his body. It was very mysterious. He complained about regular nightmares night after night, where he said in his dreams he would see this very angry-looking, hostile young woman who would shake her head at him in her dreams and point an accusory finger at him. He described her as wearing a dark, flowing 1800s dress. He would tell us that she had a fair skin, long, angular face, and her brown hair was tied in a tight bun. He said that she looked rather like a no-nonsense, strict governess. My father would wake up sweating and in a dreadful panic, because the woman in his dreams kept telling my father to get out. These atrocious night terrors were so real for my father that you could sense he was growing increasingly unsettled, alarmed, and very exhausted by the broken sleep. My mother would reassure my father tirelessly that he was only dreaming, but she had no plausible explanation for the scratches that would mysteriously appear all over his body, and would always put them down to our ginger cat Abby, which was absolutely crazy because Abby did not have a propensity to scratch at all. Before long, my parents began to fight like cats and dogs, and their fighting was relentless and was born from the silliest insignificant things like, "Why did you not bring in the firewood?" or "Who moved my hairbrush?" It was that ridiculous and pathetic, I kid you not. Even my brother admitted that my parents were behaving like juvenile delinquents. "I think we're more adult than they are," he would say to me. At this time I was about 10 years old, and I've never seen my parents act like this before, and their incongruous behaviour gave me pause for thought, and I knew something more sinister and nefarious was rarely occurring, and an outer-worldly force was pulling my parents' strings, much like a puppet controlling, manipulating, and prejudicing them against each other. Prior to the altercations in our home, my parents had been a very devoted, loving couple, but now they appeared to be tearing each other apart, literally limb from limb, like two male lions fighting over a female. Looking back, I'm convinced that the supernatural entity, which I believe was the mysterious 1800s woman who had revealed herself to my dad through his turbulent, tumultuous dreams, just wanted him out of the house, and I think she would stop at nothing to drive him out of our home, until finally she succeeded with flying colours, I might add. I am almost certain she was turning my mother against him by poisoning her mind. I always ascertained that this mysterious entity clearly had an intrinsic hatred for men. I adamantly believe that she was inflicting her abhorrence for men on my mother's subconscious mind. Before long, my belligerent mother hated my father with such an astringent bitterness that was unfathomable. She even succeeded in turning my brother Harry against my father, but she was not victorious in swaying me against him, not at all. I knew my father was an exceptional, wonderful man, and she could do nothing to alter my opinion of him, because I adored my father, and nothing could break that father-daughter bond. Before long, my father moved out of our home, and my parents both filed for divorce. And not after that event, my mother claimed she'd actually had a dream of an 1800s woman telling her that all was well now, which I thought was exceedingly odd. But now I believe that woman was telling her that all would settle down in our home because my dad had finally gone, and believe me, it actually did. Even I began to feel as if I was no longer being watched and scrutinised by that apparition of a female, and the female footsteps immediately stopped walking over my bedroom floors at night, scaring me half to death. It was like our house actually became lighter. It was not long after the divorce that I soon learnt that my dad was getting remarried to a divorcee who had two stepsons about my age called Robert and Simon. It would seem that he was living in the Pacific Northwest and enjoying a very different way of life in America. My father tirelessly wrote to me week after week, as my mother and brother churlishly wanted nothing more to do with him. It was desperately sad. My mother would say, "I'm glad that vile ogre is out of my hair, and I hope he rots in hell." And my brother would say, "I never want to see that old sod again." I longed with all my heart to see my dad again, and I missed him so very, very much that my heart just ached, as his physical absence in my life was such an insurmountable loss. One day when I was 18 years old, my father sent me a return air ticket to America and invited me to go and stay at his new home in the Pacific Northwest. I could hardly wait, much to the disapproval of my mother, who suggested that I tore the air ticket up. "You don't want to go and stay with that monster," she would say to me. Fast forward to the day that I actually arrived in America to be met by my stepmother Linda and her 2 sons, and of course my father. It was such an emotional reunion, and my father held me in his arms and we just wept and wept. "I missed you so much, Robin," he cried, my father. "It's been just way too long." I remember that emotional reunion with such crystal clear clarity, as my father and I sat up all night talking and talking until the early hours of the morning, when we finally heard the dawn chorus. We had just so much catching up to do. My father affirmed to me that he also believed that a paranormal entity in our home in England had driven a wedge in my parents' marriage. He told me there were times in the bedroom that he had fallen fast asleep, only to be awoken to the feeling that something was literally sitting on his chest and trying to suffocate the life out of him. And whatever it was, he said it wanted him dead or out of the house. He could sense it in every single fibre of his being. I knew it was that evil witch that had visited me in my dreams, he told me. "Your mother told me that I was talking through my backside and that there was no paranormal activity in our home at all. But I knew there was. I remember being violently punched, assaulted and scratched in that house, just at random. And there were times I would watch those scratches supernaturally appear on my skin with no plausible explanation whatsoever. Whatever was in that house, said my father, it made me become so angry, vicious and hateful towards your mother. It also poisoned her attitude towards me. Before I knew it, we were lashing out at each other like a cat and a dog, with such rageful bitterness that it was seemingly galvanized by an insidiously evil undercurrent that was not of this world. I am certain of that. My father's house in the Pacific Northwest was very rural, quaint, rustic and charming, rather symmetrical home with a great deal of character, I might add. It was initially built in the 1800s and had been converted into a very spacious, airy and modern farmhouse. It had a very large wooden deck area for entertainment purposes and overlooked exquisite views over mountainous valleys and emerald green rolling hills. And on the left-hand side of the valley there was a vast wooded area that literally stretched back for many miles, and it was teeming with natural wildlife. I was just head over heels in love with the white-tailed deer there. I adored the way they frolicked in the woods and twitched their white tails. They were absolutely stunning. Before long I had developed a very great good bond between my 2 stepbrothers, who were both around my age, and really great fun to hang around with. But I was soon to learn that they were not nearly as adventurous as I was, and I was about to change all that. "Be warned," my father teased them. "My little Robin here is a brave and feisty girl, so don't be fooled by her slight exterior. My daughter is very, very inquisitive and very curious, and she'll be pushing your boundaries, believe you me." Of course, my father was right. I just adored exploring, and I was passionate about getting out into the natural world. One day I actively encouraged my 2 stepbrothers to explore the wooded area on their land with me, and I was surprised by their reticence, reluctance, and lack of enthusiasm, which was seemingly incongruous for young boys their age, I thought. "There are things in the woods," said Robert, shaking his head adamantly. "Horrible things that stare you down and follow you, things that cannot be explained, but they're very definitely real." "It's true," insisted Simon. "Something horrible is in those woods. And when we were younger, it was chasing us, grunting, snorting and growling at us. And whatever it was, this thing was colossal. It frightened the living daylights out of us." "You are joking, right?" I asked. "No, we're not," they insisted. Something big and horrible lives in those woods, and we're not joking. When was the last time you explored in there? I asked curiously. About 8 years ago, said Simon, looking serious. That thing, whatever it was scary, it was horrifying, it was horrendous. Look, I said, do you not think you're being a bit sissy and overreacting? You're being a little bit pathetic, perhaps? Pardon me for being so blatantly blunt, but I mean just because of one strange experience that you had over 8 long years ago in those woods, you're now avoiding them like the plague. That's so ridiculous. I've lived in a home with paranormal activity all my life, and nothing terrible happened to me. Look, I'm still here, am I not? I do not think if that creature that followed us was paranormal. Look, I said, do you not think you're being a bit sissy and overreactive and a wee bit pathetic? Pardon me for being so blatantly blunt, but I mean just because of one strange experience you had 8 long years ago in those woods, you're now avoiding them like the plague. That sounds utterly ridiculous to me. I've lived in a home with paranormal activity all my life, and nothing terrible happened to me. I'm still here, am I not? I do not know if that creature that followed us was actually paranormal, said Simon. It sounded hauntingly real. We could hear it breathing and snorting like a horse, and Robert was certain he saw a very large dark shadow that was literally following us and shadowing us, and it was snapping twigs under its feet, and it sounded gargantuan. Pooh, pooh, I scoffed. Do you realise how ridiculously girly you both sound? Even my brother Harry would have more backbone than both of you. You are both completely spineless, and are being paranoid and irrational. If you're not going to come with me into those woods, then I'm going alone, which is a pity because I would have enjoyed your company. Simon looked at Robert wearily. Look, we better take Robin into those woods with us. We cannot let her go on there alone. We can take our rifles with us for protection. How about it? So there we were. We went into the woods, and they were beautiful, and the idyllic bird song was utterly exquisite. And the further we ventured into the woods, the more Simon and Robert began to relax. It was like their previous anxiety and dread had all but dissipated, to be overtaken by a heightened enthusiasm and curiosity. There's an elderly couple who live somewhere in these woods, Simon told me. Their house is further down towards the left. If you walk through the woods, there's a road on the other side, and the narrow driveway of this couple's property leads on to that road. You mean to tell me that an elderly couple has lived in these woods all these years, and yet you couldn't enter the area for 8 long years, I scoffed. Do you realise how crazy and pathetic that sounds? Maybe you're right, said Simon. I'm now beginning to feel a little bit silly, and I do regret not coming into these woods more often when we were younger. I think we may have missed out in retrospect. Of course you did, I said. Oh, there is the house, said Simon, stopping dead in his tracks. It looks derelict and abandoned, he said in horror. It doesn't look like the elderly couple lives here any more. How extraordinarily strange, he said. I stood still, observing everything for a moment, and taking it all in. The house looked completely dilapidated. I could see that there was peeling paint on every surface, and there were weeds and creepers climbing up the walls like hungry vultures. The windows looked like they were falling out of the building because the wood had become so warped. Parts of the front door had broken off, and there were 2 cars in the yard that were so rusted and weathered by time that the grass was literally growing through the vehicles. I remember my heart was fluttering with excited curiosity and extreme fascination. A real abandoned house, I said excitedly. It doesn't get better than this. This would be the perfect setting for a horror movie. The house looked like it's watching us. And it's so lovely and creepy, I said. Come, let's go. As we entered the house, the wooden floorboards groaned under our weight, and we were amazed to see that the house was still furnished, even though the furnishings had all but faded, and some of the Persian carpets had been eaten away by moths. The place was very dusty, neglected, and strewn with cobwebs, and a few dead insects were scattered on window ledges and along the floors. It was clear to see that the dining room table had been set, and it looked like the couple had eaten a meal and never got to finish it, which I thought was decidedly odd. It certainly made me reflect on what could have happened to make them leave their premises in such a hurry, including abandoning all their worldly possessions. It was exceedingly strange. Had something scared them away, I wondered? And what? We continued to explore the home, finding all kinds of interesting curios that led me to believe that this elderly couple had been remarkably well travelled. There were Russian dolls from Russia, a cuckoo clock from Switzerland, and soldiers with busbies on their heads from Great Britain. When we entered the couple's bedroom, we could see that the bed sheets were crawling with spiders, and we could see the ominous indentations on the pillows where the couple had last slept. I was so fascinated and intrigued, and I wondered what on earth could have happened to this poor elderly couple. I really sensed in my gut that something brutal had occurred here, but what I could not imagine. Something felt distinctly off. Suddenly we heard a curious, strange scratching sound coming from the closet in the bedroom, and even though I thought it was possibly a rat or something, curiosity finally got the better of me, and I went to investigate, and finally I opened the closet door. I've never seen such a forlorn, bedraggled, horrifying and shocking sight in my entire life. I kid you not, we discovered the dead corpse of an elderly woman sitting hunched up in the closet as if she'd been hiding from something that terrified her. She had died in this frightful way. Her corpse had become mummified because it was leathery skin shriveled and tightened onto a skeleton with huge hollow eye sockets for eyes. It was not a pretty sight by any manner of means. I noticed she didn't even have the smell of death or decay about her, because she had become like a fossilized stone. How was that even possible, I wondered? Was it the dry air in the closet? Had that mummified her? Suddenly, in a delayed reaction, all three of us started screaming at once in terror, because seeing a corpse like this was a horrifying shock for us, and as the reality of our grievous situation dawned on us, we became very, very afraid. Little did we realise that things were about to get a whole lot worse. Suddenly we heard this thunderous roar and heavy feet running towards the house in a response to our screams. And whatever it was, it sounded exceedingly colossal and very, very dangerous. "It's that beast," cried Simon in utter terror. "Get into the closet now, now, get in." I kid you not, we were huddled, terrified, in the closet next to a dead corpse, and as you can imagine, that is a horrendous experience. And to make matters worse, there was a rat crawling all over us in an attempt to get out of the closet, and it kept scratching away at the door, seemingly unconcerned about our presence. At the best of times, I hate rats, but we all knew that we had to remain as quiet as conceivably possible. Whatever this thing was, it was thundering and hammering around the home, looking for us, because it had heard our screams. It was mammoth. Even though I could not see it at the time, I could sense the monstrous presence of this thing, and I knew it had to be titanic in size. We kept very quiet and still, as we heard the creature pounding around the house, and we could hear its noisy horse-like breathing. I remember it was standing yards away from the closet, but thankfully it did not detect us, but it had the most rank sulphurous body odour that I have ever encountered, that was so despicable I almost hurled. We could hear it make these horrible grunts as it bolted around the house like a bull in a china shop. After a while, everything became very quiet and ominously still. I falsely believed that the hideous critter had finally gone. I crept out of the cupboard to take a peek outside the bedroom window because I was so inquisitive, against the futile protests of Simon and Robert. As I looked out of the window, I saw this monstrous 10-foot-tall, hairy humanoid ape, covered in jet-black hair, and he was using his overlong arms to lift up the rusty cars in the yard. I noticed he manoeuvred them with such effortless ease that he made them look like they were kids' toys, I kid you not. I believe the hideously deranged critter was looking for us. I could only get a sideways view of him. I had seen enough to haunt my nightmares for an entire eternity. This critter was built like a tank. He was incredibly muscular, weighty, and very, very powerful. He must have been about 1,000 pounds and at least 5 foot wide, with human-like hands and feet, and a very distinct cone-shaped head, hectically humongous shoulders, and a rather angular-looking face. I didn't get to see the rest of his face, though. I watched the creature stamp his feet as if he was having a childlike tantrum. He then pounded his chest with his fists and let out the most horrifying roar that sounded exactly like a lion, only infinitely worse. The creature then hightailed it through the woods and was gone, moving like a tornado through the woods. That was how hectic it was. Fast forward a week or so, and I'm glad to say we were able to put the whole harrowing ordeal behind us. How we got back to the farmhouse that night, after our petrifying experience, I will never know, but somehow we managed. Unfortunately, in our haste to get out of the closet, the dead corpse of the old woman fell out of the closet and landed flat on its face. We informed the police about the dead body of the woman in the house, and they said that she had died of natural causes, but they were baffled that her body had become mummified. As I expected, they could not find any trace of the husband, whom appeared to have vanished into thin air. We wanted to tell the police about the dangerous critter that chased us, but my father told us to keep very quiet about it, because it was unlikely that the officers would believe our story, because it sounded so spurious and fictitious. I know you would not make a story up like that, he said to us, and if I'm struggling to make sense of it and to believe it, imagine how the police will react to it. It's better not to tell them anything at all. And I knew he was right. All these years later, I know that the critter we encountered that day in the woods was indeed a Bigfoot, but this one was so territorial, I think he had the idea that everything in the woods, including the dilapidated home, was his. I believe he may have killed the woman's husband because no record of him was ever found or discovered. I believe maybe the elderly woman saw her husband being killed or dragged away by the violent creature, and in her terror she hid in the closet, and was so utterly petrified to come out of her hiding place that she literally starved to death, or maybe died of thirst. All these years later I got married to Simon, who is not my natural brother by blood, but only by association, and so I am now an American-English girl living in the Pacific Northwest. My mother never ever married again, and I believe that ghostly entity influenced her perception of men, which was really, really sad. My brother Harry lives in England with a family of his own, and luckily he and my father reconnected about 10 years after my Bigfoot encounter, so all is well that ends well. So I hope you enjoyed my story. I just want to say thank you so much for that utterly phenomenal story. What an incredible, incredible encounter that you had, and a terrifying one. I cannot imagine being in a closet with a corpse, a mummified one at that. Wow, that was terrifying. I can't imagine it. That's something you would expect out of a movie, but not real life. But my word, that really did happen to you. Until next time, goodbye and good night.